Perfect. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on your Wednesday. Hopefully you've got something to eat and you're ready to talk about compliance. I know Doug and I are also happy to answer any questions along the way. If you do have anything, drop it in the chat, or if there's a raise your hand feature, Tori will make sure that we see it. I don't have great visibility of the chat while I'm sharing, but we'll definitely make sure to get all questions answered by the end of this webinar. All right. So for today's agenda, we'll start by just introducing ourselves. We'll talk about high level, what is GO-IBR and some of the NERC definitions that you'll want to be aware of during this presentation. And then Doug will give us a great overview of the GO-IBR grid history and what's going on, what it means for you and what you need to know. And then I'll walk us through some of the registration and applicability features that might impact you and your facility. And then we'll take a little bit of a detour to talk about those future standards, and then we'll wrap up with Q&A. All right, Doug, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself. Doug, you're muted.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Doug Brown. I'm the Vice President of Compliance here at Grid SME. I've been here for almost 4 years. Prior to that, I was the manager of the O&P audit team for WEC. Prior to that, I was with Western Area Power Administration for 28 years. And while I was at Western Area Power Administration, I had a whole bunch of different jobs, responsibilities. I was the regional compliance manager for the Upper Great Plains region. I was also the supervisor over transmission and generation operators. Prior to that, I was a compliance specialist for maintenance, and I managed the RTU shop. And I also performed SCADA support for quite a while. So I have a lot of industry experience, so feel free to ask me anything as we're going along here. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Kaylie so she can tell you a little about herself.
Perfect. Hi, yes, my name is Kaylie Hague. I'm the Director of Compliance here at Grid SME. Really started by just studying environmental science in college and had a focus in hydrology, which led me to a small municipal in Northern California with a handful of hydroelectric facilities, and I handled their compliance, anything you could consider compliance over there. Life took me outside of California, and that's how I ended up with Grid SME. Started as the compliance analyst and then transitioned over to leading implementation projects. So that's registration and standing up compliance programs. Last year, we were able to assist with 6.5 gigawatts of power coming onto the grid, which was great. And now I serve as the Director of Compliance. So I just do all those things, but with a team of people. All right. Before we go too much further, I just want to make sure we get some definitions out of the way. Starting at the top, GO, that's just going to be your generator owner if you own a facility registered with NERC. GOP, you're operating those from a remote control center or potentially even on site. Your IBR is going to be inverter-based resources. If we talk about ERO or CORS, just know that's the NERC portal where registration and ongoing compliance coordination occurs. So you might hear us refer to that as the NERC portal, ERO, or CORS. Regions, that's going to be the 6 regional entities beneath NERC, including MRO, MPCC, RF, CERC, TRE, and WEC. And even though we're talking about the GO-IBR initiative, which applies to all regions, they do each have a little bit of their own processes and expectations and contacts. Next is going to be the BES or BES, not to be confused with battery energy storage, which is the ESS. We'll be talking about the bulk electric system mainly today, but there are some references to the battery system as well. And then lastly, gross nameplate capacity. And this one's important because for NERC, we're looking at this as your apparent power rating MVA based on your inverters. And this is not going to consider your operational modes, any limitations, or your reactive resources. And we'll give you some examples and really walk through those a little bit later in this slideshow as well. All right, to define inverter-based resources or IBR a little bit further, this is going to be your electricity generation or storage technologies that use power electronic devices, such as inverters to convert direct current or to alternating current for connection to the grid. So this will be your solar PV, wind, battery or BESS, and any hybrid of those. These storage systems are increasingly replacing traditional synchronous generation in the power grid. And so if we were to look at thermal or hydro generation, they're primarily based on the physical design of a generator, but the behavior of IBRs is primarily driven by power electronic controls, which provide a higher degree of flexibility, but also higher electrical complexity. So understanding the inverter interactions among other inverters and with other grid components can be important to maintaining a reliable grid. And Doug's going to take us through a deeper look at that history and the inner workings of it. So I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Kaylie. So over the last 25 years, the United States grid has changed drastically. There's been a huge shift away from the dominance of coal-fired plants towards more diverse energy sources. And that's caused a number of different things to occur in our grid. So that generation mix, each one of those resources has different characteristics, and we're going to look at some of them. And some of those things present some challenges to grid stability, and we're going to look at what the regulatory response was based upon those changes. Next slide, please. Thanks. So in 2000, coal made up 52% of our generation, and it's dropped to 15% in 2024. Natural gas has increased slightly, and wind and solar have made a huge impact. So in 2000, they were about 2% of the generation mix, and now they're about 17%. And that seems to be the trend. We will probably continue to build combined cycle natural gas plants. And we will certainly be building a lot of solar plants. But nuclear has stayed about 20% through all of this period of time. I would expect that large nuclear plants to continue to be decommissioned. Perhaps some smaller nuclear plants will be built. But the timeline for building new nuclear plants is fairly long, and I don't think that that's likely to have any impact in the near term. Primarily, what we need to look at is what are the characteristics that each one of these generation resources provided. So if we could look at the next slide here. Traditionally, the way we operated the grid was that we had coal-fired plants providing baseload. Now, what baseload means is that it just runs continuously. Nuclear plants are great for baseload. Combined cycle natural gas is as well. And geothermal and large hydro plants also serve really great as baseload. What we mean by baseload is that we could ramp that generation up to what we expected the demand for power to be for a long period of time, and it would just sit there. And then to supplement that, we would have reserves, particularly spinning reserves, that were dispatchable. And that dispatchable energy could be scaled up or scaled down at a moment's notice to meet the demand, because you may or may not be aware of this, but at any moment in time, the amount of power that's being generated has to match very, very closely to the amount of energy that's being consumed. And when it doesn't match, it affects both frequency and voltage, and those things are very undesirable to be messing with. So what we've been adding in terms of solar and wind are what we call intermittent resources. And they require some kind of a backup. You can't just operate your grid with intermittent resources, because load can change from moment to moment. And you have to be able to count on having that base load there and having some ability to dispatch more generation as the demand changes and grows. So next slide, please. So another thing that has been slowly going away is spinning inertia, and that added a lot to grid stability. So traditional sources of generation, all of them, whether it's nuclear or hydro or coal-fired plants or combined cycle natural gas plants, they all have a huge mass in the magneto or in the turbine that's spinning. And that mass being in motion added a lot of stability, because it's a law that an object in motion tends to stay in motion unless it's acted upon by an outside force. So that spinning inertia would keep our frequency and our voltage very stable. It made it very, it took a lot larger event to cause a change in frequency or voltage when all of our resources provided that characteristic of spinning inertia. So it resisted sudden changes to frequency. Modern solutions to try to supplement that decline of the characteristic of spinning inertia are synchronous generators or synchronous condensers. Grid forming inverters can help support that. But wind and solar don't inherently support the lack of spinning inertia. What they can do is react very quickly, but that's actually the opposite of what the benefit of having spinning inertia is. Spinning inertia operated very slowly based upon disturbances to the system. So next slide, please. So if we want to have a reliable grid, there's a number of things that are required. And starting at the bottom of this pyramid, we have to have something to base load. We have to have a consistent source of power that's there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, weekends, holidays, whatever. We have to have that base load. And then we need to have some dispatchable power that can adjust to the demands as it fluctuates. The spinning inertia helps us to maintain frequency and voltage. And what we've been adding are these intermittent resources, and that's affected grid resilience. And so we're endeavoring to have different requirements for inverters and inverter-based generation sources that are being added to the grid now. So what we need to have is appropriate inverter relay settings. We need to have good ways to capture the data if we have an event that happens on the system. And we need to provide that data to the folks that do the modeling and analyze what happened in an event. They have to have the data in order to understand that event and better design features into the grid that will help that grid to maintain frequency and voltage as this spinning inertia goes away. We need to build accurate models, and we need to add the appropriate energy resources. And you can go to that next slide. So key takeaways is that we now have a very diverse generation mix. It used to be dominated by coal. Now that's being replaced either by combined cycle natural gas plants or renewable resources. We also have natural gas peakers, and they can help as a dispatchable load there. They're on demand. They respond very, very quickly. Not the same way that spinning inertia does, but they can make up for changes in the demand for electricity. So grid reliability changes. We need to have a balance between those intermittent resources and our stable sources. The regulatory framework is endeavoring to address these things. New requirements help us to know that our inverters will continue to inject current into the system. So long as they're not going to be damaged, that's what we want them to do when there's an event on a transmission system. It's just to keep doing what they were doing. We're also developing technological solutions and deploying more of the solutions that have already been developed, like battery energy storage and synthetic inertia, And that's the key to being able to operate our grid with more and more renewable resources. So now, how did we address this, or why did we address this? We've had a whole bunch of events that have occurred more and more frequently that have all been focused on inverter-based resources. And Kaylie's going to tell us a little bit more about FERC Order 901. And
so, as Doug's mentioning, the transition from synchronous generation to IBRs is introducing a lot of challenges for the grid stability and reliability. And so a major part of addressing these challenges is ensuring that we have accurate data, robust modeling, and appropriate performance requirements in place. And so that's where FERC Order 901 comes into play. Starting with data sharing, historically, access to detailed IBR modeling data was really inconsistent, and it made it really difficult for planning coordinators and transmission operators to assess system reliability accurately. And so FERC Order 901 explicitly requires IBR owners to provide accurate modeling and disturbance monitoring data, ensuring that planners and operators have the necessary data to maintain reliability. And if we look at model validation, again, existing models for IBRs were either incomplete or inaccurate based on FERC and NERC's analysis. And this really led to discrepancies between expected and actual performance during disturbances. And if we're going to have more IBR resources on the grid, then those resources need to be able to ride through or respond to disturbances accurately, or at least allow the planning teams to plan for the way that they react. So NERC, our FERC 901 is going to enforce stricter validation processes to ensure that IBR models reflect real-world performances and improve grid operators' ability to anticipate and mitigate reliability risks. For the planning and operational studies, those studies were built around synchronous generation, but IBRs introduce an entirely different dynamic response that needs to be accounted for in reliability assessment. So this will require planners and operators to incorporate the unique characteristics of IBRs into the studies just to ensure we have comprehensive system assessments. And then lastly, for performance requirements, as I mentioned, inconsistent ride-through capabilities among GO-IBRs have contributed to unexpected tripping and widespread disturbances. So in order to mitigate that, FERC wants to establish clear standardized performance requirements, such as frequency and voltage ride-through, so that IBRs can respond predictably under both normal and abnormal conditions on the grid. In response to FERC 901, NERC released this GO-IBR registration milestone. Just want to walk everyone through it real quick. And really, this is how NERC is aligning with FERC's goals, and the registration milestones outline a phased approach for identifying, registering, and then ensuring compliance for these resources that were not previously considered. So phase one was May 2023 to 2024. We're out of that phase, but really the focus there was revising the NERC rules of procedure to define how Category 2 IBRs will be registered. The original rules of procedure just did not encompass the thresholds that we're going to be talking about. And then they also began initial outreach and education efforts to ensure that any impacted entities understand the new requirements and are prepared for what's coming, which is phase 2, which we are currently in. And this is about identifying the Category 2 GO and GO-IBRs and to bring them through the registration process or prep them through the registration process. And this was done through a handful of updates, webinars, and workshops hosted by regions all over. And they have really aligned the expectations and processes, which is really great because regardless of the region you're in, they're treating them all the same. And then one thing to just note here is that you may have received RFIs or registration requests during this phase. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. And then there's phase 3, which we are quickly approaching. And this is to get the IBRs to actually complete the formal registration process and continue education and industry engagement to ensure smooth integration for the compliance framework that is going to be applicable to you. And Doug, feel free to interrupt me and add anything at any point too, if you want.
Thanks, Kaylie.
So one thing that they had to do was assess how they're going to include GO-IBRs into the registration and NERC procedures, rule of procedure. So category 1 and category 2 are what you're going to be hearing a lot. Category 1 is going to be the bright line threshold that NERC has relied on, and many of the smaller entities were not included, which is why we have category 2 now. But category 1 is going to be your thresholds that are greater than or equal to 75 MVA, and they're interconnected at 100 kV or higher. Your category 2 is going to be aggregated nameplate capacities between 20 MVA and 75 MVA, and interconnected at 60 kV or higher. And we are also going to go through some examples in a moment here, but just important to note the distinctions between the two. And when you complete the registration process, you'll actually be following the category 2 registration. All right. First example here, I'm going to turn on. You guys see my laser pointer?
Yep.
Perfect. So these examples are pulled directly from NERC's guide to help people register and assess their facility. If you have any questions about your facility, they encourage you to reach out to the region to help you assess your applicability. But we're going to go through some examples here today and hopefully help you and spark any questions you might have to help you determine if this is going to apply to you. So this first one here is what I'm going to consider an easy or basic setup. So we have these inverter banks, 5 here. We got 4 of them individually rated at 2.5 MVA. So together, these are all going to have an aggregate capacity of 50 MVA. This does not include your reactive devices. This does not include any limitations that you put on. And this does not include your GIA limitation. This is connected on the high side at 69 kV. So for 50 MVA, connecting at the POI for 69 kV, does this meet the GO-IBR categorization requirements? Yes, this facility would be required to register. Okay, let's take a look at a hybrid site here. So on the left, we've got 10 PV inverter banks individually rated at 1.5 MVA for a total of 15 MVA for the solar side. For the battery side, we've got the same setup, it's just battery. So 10 BESS inverter banks individually rated at 1.5 MVA for a total of 15 MVA for the battery. But they come together and they have an aggregate of 30 MVA, and they're connected to the grid on the high side at 115 kV. So does this meet the GO-IBR registration requirements? Yes, because it's above 20 MVA and it's connected above 60 kV. All right, now you might be thinking, well, I only own the batteries. I don't own the PV. Well, NERC unfortunately does not care. So we'll look at it again here, but with separate owners. So company A owns the PV portion, exact same setup, 10 inverter banks, each rated at 1.5 MVA. So that's a total of 15 MVA. And we've seen, people say, well, I don't meet the categorization because I'm at 15 MVA. I'm not at 20. But you're aggregating with company B, who owns the battery storage. And this is also 15 MVA. So together, you're connecting at 30 MVA with the high side voltage of 115 kV. So yes, you must register. Even if you are separate owners, you will each be required to register. All right, next example, we're going to throw some synchronous generation in here with your GO-IBR. So remember, synchronous generation is not considered an IBR resource, but there are situations where you might aggregate together. So we'll take a moment to look at that. This blue side over here is your synchronous generation for a total of 50 MVA connected on the high side at 115 kV. So this is already a bulk electric system qualified side. And then if we look over here at the IBR side, we have 2, 4, 6, 8 BESS inverter banks individually rated at 2.5 MVA. So that will give us 20 MVA, and they are connected at 115 kV. So together they're aggregating for a total capacity of 70 MVA and connected at 115 kV. So yes, you must register. Let's look at another one. So again, a synchronous hybrid site. This time, the synchronous side is only 25 MVA and it's connected below 69 kV. So the synchronous alone does not meet the BES definition, and that's because it's below 100 kV. If we look at that GO-IBR side, we see we have 6 inverter banks individually rated at 2.5 MVA. So 15 MVA connected at 69 kV. This alone does not meet the GO-IBR Category 2 requirement. And even though it's aggregating with the BESS side, NERC says this doesn't count because it still does not meet the BES definition over here. So together, even though we're at 40 MVA at 69 kV, you do not have to register as a Category 2. All right, and last example here, another synchronous hybrid example. This time we've got a 25 MVA synchronous generation connected at 138 kV. This side does meet the BES synchronous generation threshold. And over here we've got 2, 4, 6 BESS inverter banks individually rated at 2.5 MVA for a total of 15 MVA. And are connected at 138 kV. These are going to aggregate together for a total of 40 MVA at 138 kV. But this does not have to be registered because your IBR threshold is below 20 MVA. So this does not have to be registered as a Category 2 GO-IBR. I'm going to stop there. That's my last example that I pulled from the NERC registration guidance. Does anybody have any questions or situations they would like to talk through as a group while we're looking at these? All right, we'll jump into the next section then. So going through all those examples, if this does apply to you and you're going to need to register as a Category 2 GO-IBR, what does that mean for you? Well, you're going to need to coordinate with your applicable region and complete the registration process, including the submission of data submittals. You're going to want to assign your roles and responsibilities, set up your NERC account, and then you're going to develop a compliance program to meet the applicable GO-IBR standards. In the future, you'll be expected to submit modeling and operational data for integration, like we talked about. That'll include your ride-through capabilities, fault performance, and monitoring. If you're an existing site or maybe you're building now, you'll want to ensure that your cybersecurity protocols are in line with the SIP 3 standards. And then if you're an existing unit, you might have to undergo equipment upgrades or testing to meet fault ride-through voltage regulation and frequency response requirements. And then in the future, you also will want to continue your engagement with NERC and your region as you may be required to complete self-certifications or be audited to ensure compliance with critical standards. All right. So as part of phase 2, you may have received an RFI or a registration request. Entities can expect an RFI from their region if you haven't received one yet. They're going to be looking for a handful of things. Site specifications, this is going to be where are you at, how are you configured, and any key operational characteristics. They'll want to see a single line diagram to assess what we were just looking at. Does this meet the threshold? What is your setup? What are you aggregating and connecting at? And where is your interconnection point? They're also going to want to take a look at your interconnection agreements, any formal agreements with your TO or TP, and your operational agreements. So your O&M agreements that establish your role and responsibility and coordination requirements. And then they're going to have you fill out some forms. First being the GO-GOP asset verification form. This is a high-level overview of your system and how it's connected with the grid. And then each region typically has their own specific data forms, just asking a little bit more about your facility and understanding who their key contacts are. For the registration process, NERC has provided a lot of great resources. I listed a few here that you should be aware of. The rules of procedure, this is going to cover your registration and compliance framework. The registration procedure is step-by-step expectations for new registrations. And same with the onboarding checklist. That'll give you a good visual of what you need and how you can prepare for your registration. The core's end user guide will help you set up your ERO portal account. And then the CMEP best practice, this will provide insight into how compliance monitoring enforcement applies to battery storage and hybrid IBR facilities. It's also where you can find those examples that I was showing you today. And then the last one here is going to be the application of registration criteria. This is the slideshow that they've been presenting, detailing the registration thresholds and the expectations for IBRs. So essentially covers a lot of the things that we're talking about here today. If you are a new site, I just wanted to provide you guys with a timeline that I would expect. So about 12 to 18 months before COD, you'll be assessing whether your site meets the criteria. And then you'll begin the registration process by just coordinating with your regional entity and ensuring you're aware of all the requirements and the timelines that they want you to adhere to. 6 to 12 months before COD, you'll be submitting your registration package. Those are all the things that we've been talking about before: the GO-GOP asset verification form, single line diagram, interconnection agreements, all those good things. And you're going to start developing your NERC compliance program to ensure compliance post-COD. About 3 to 6 months before COD, you should be finalizing your compliance program and coordinating your availability testing as appropriate. And then COD beyond, you'll be maintaining your records and reports, and you'll be reviewing NERC alerts and all of the good things that come with being a NERC registered entity. One thing that I do want to highlight when we're talking about COD, new site preparation, is that COD has many different definitions out there. Whether you're talking about equipment, EPC, ISO, PPA, or NERC, not to be confusing at all. I just wanted to go through a couple of those here. So equipment COD would be the date that your equipment is installed and approved for operation. Your EPC COD, or substantial completion, is going to be when they're handing over the project and the physical completion of your facility. Your ISO is going to be full integration and operation with the market is approved. So this often catches people because your ISO COD is approval to connect and participate, but it doesn't necessarily mean on that day you've started commencing commercial operation. Your PPA COD
in the chat.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Does NERC COD need to align with any of the other CODs?
In a perfect world, yes. It would be ideal if your ISO, PPA, and NERC COD aligned. More often than not, it doesn't. In my experience, that's because the ISO has a lot of control about when your COD occurs there. And it just happens to occur usually about 10 days before your NERC COD. And that's also because when your ISO gives you COD approval, you're usually buttoning things up finishing things with your EPC. There's just a handful of coordination items that you'll want to put a bow on beforehand. NERC does ideally want your PPA COD to be the same as your NERC COD. And that's because it's the date you must begin selling power to your off-taker and what we would consider the sale of commercial power. And that for NERC is when you would actually register. And so jumping down to the NERC COD, your NERC COD is going to be the date at which you are compliant with the NERC standards. And I want to talk about that a little bit more, and hopefully it'll answer your question a little bit more. But in a perfect world, these would all be close. I think more often than not, that's not the case. Doug, anything to add to that?
No, I think you captured it well, Kaylie. There will be some more information potentially about when new plants need to register when they're category 2. Right now, for a category 1 plant, you're expected to be compliant with all the NERC standards when you're selling 75 MVA into the commercial market. Obviously, that threshold you might never meet with a category 2 plant. So there'll be some more guidance coming out about when new plants should register. But right now, the timeline is that all plants are expected to be registered by May of 2026, if they're existing now.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Yeah,
We have some extra questions now too, but I can read them now, or we can wait till the end, whatever you guys want.
Let me cover these next 2 slides because I think they'll answer some questions, and then we'll jump.
Okay,
Thanks.
sounds good.
So this is actually pulled from NERC. So they define COD as the date after which all initial testing and commissioning has been completed, and the initiation date on which the GO and GOP can start producing electricity for sale. And then upon this date, you're expected to be 100% compliant with your reliability standards. So you might get ISO approval to connect, but you're still polishing up your firewall rule set, and therefore you're going to opt not to sell commercial power yet until you're 100% compliant. So you might have a couple days in between those dates. One thing though that I really want to point out here is this footnote 5. And footnote 5 says that this excludes the sale of test power during initial testing. So oftentimes I see people panic, they need to register because they're going to be producing electricity for sale. You can sell test power. What they want to know is when you are done with your commissioning, your testing, your GOP has care, custody, control, visibility, your EPC is offsite, you're 100% compliant with your ISO and NERC, that would be the date that you would declare NERC COD. Let's see here. Perfect. Okay, and then looking at the chat here. What type of test? Okay, Doug, this is a question for you. What type of testing requirements might they expect to do from NERC and WEC as a GO-IBR?
So that's a great question, and we're going to take a look here in just a slide or two. We'll be looking at which standards will be applicable to category 2, and I'll talk some more about it there.
Perfect. We'll cover that in a second, though. I'm going to hop down to some other questions. An RFI came out from NPCC. Did other NERC areas send RFIs as well? Yes. I think I have seen RFIs from WEC, CERC, TRE, NPCC. I don't believe I've seen any from MRO yet, but that doesn't mean that they haven't gone out. Do you see this as the same heavy lift as category 1 registration? Yes, the registration process will be identical, except for you fill out a different tab in their forms, but the registration process itself will be the same lift. Are you supposed to have NERC registered GOPs by May 2026? Yes, great question. So if you are a GOP and you are going to be operating a GO facility that meets the Category 2 GO-IBR threshold, then you will need to register. Or if you're already registered, you'll need to expand your footprint. This should be done in conjunction with your GO. So if you are a GOP, you are not allowed to register without a GO. And so that should be done synonymously. So when your GO is a Category 2, they're ready to declare NERC registration or COD, you would do so tangentially. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else on that one. Okay, in theory, should we receive RFIs by May 2025? In theory, yes. If they're not aware of your facility, then I would say it could come later. How are the REs determining who to send it to? I'm anticipating an RFI from WEC, but haven't received anything yet. So one of the ways they're determining it, and Doug, maybe you could speak to this more, is through the transmission and planning coordinators.
Yes. So recently, each of the regions sent out questionnaires to balancing authorities and transmission operators saying who's connected to your system, who do you monitor? And questionnaires have gone out to those entities that identified by the BA or the TOP.
Yeah. And I would say if you haven't received an RFI and you're expecting one, I would encourage you to reach out to the region. They're incredibly helpful. And I would say it's more pain-free if you just do it early and start asking questions than having a scramble. Definitely encourage you to reach out to them. They're really, really helpful. Are GOPs expected to submit for Category 2 registration ahead of May 2026? Are there any penalties or risks for not registering early?
So I would say there are some benefits to registering early, but there's not any penalties for waiting towards the end. But each of the regions has a really tall order to get a lot of plants registered. So they've got a lot of work on their plates. And so they're going to be very appreciative of those entities that are forward thinking and wanting to be compliant. And having worked at WEC and understanding how their risk models work, I would expect them to assign a lower risk rating to those plants that register early. And what that equates to is less intrusive monitoring activities going forward.
Right, perfect. And I think those are all the questions so far. One thing I do want to just add to the question about the heavy lift of Category 1 registrations, Doug is about to hop into the applicability of reliability standards, and he'll talk about the lift that we are expecting for Category 2.
Thanks, Kaylee. So this is the list of applicable reliability standards for Category 2 GO-IBR. And the list doesn't look very different than the list for Category 1. The one thing that I don't see on here is PRC 5, which PRC 5 is about the maintenance activities. So that's the only break that I see you getting. And earlier there was a question about testing. So one of the big areas that they identified is not having enough information. They felt like the transmission planners and transmission or planning coordinators didn't have valid models. And so model validation was one of the things that Kaylee mentioned, and mod testing. Those standards are being worked on right now. So you can see in the slide that the mod standards in this first row here, those require modification for applicability. Everything in that first row, center column, all of those standards there, the reason they require modification is because the language is all very specific to bulk electric system. And the NERC rules of procedure define the bulk electric system as being 100 kV and above. These plants are connected to the bulk electric system below that. So the language in each one of those standards has to be modified so that it's clear that those standards are applicable to those plants that had to register because they're in this category 2. So Mod 27, Mod 25 and Mod 27 are listed there. Mod 25 is about real and reactive power. And Mod 27 is about your turbine and governor control to affect frequency on the system. And if you recall early on in the presentation, that's one of the challenges that the grid faces with the decline of plants that provide spinning inertia. So I would expect that what your plants are going to have to do is to provide test records and model validation for each of the mod standards, turbine and generator governor control. You're going to have to make sure that your models are valid. You're going to have to make sure that, so in a conventional plant, had what we would, your frequency response was based upon how your governor reacted. So in a inverter-based plant, we have to have something that simulates that. So you're going to be demonstrating the verification of your excitation controls to support volt and var production onto the system. So back to this list of standards here. All of these standards in this first row are being modified so that it's clear that they're applicable to category 2. Other standards that are in development specifically to address the challenges of inverter-based resources being the predominant thing that's being added as the spinning inertia declines is Mod 26, Mod 32, Mod 33, PRC 29, PRC 30. Those standards, PRC 29 and 30, replace existing standards having to do with disturbance monitoring. PRC 28 is another standard there that has been approved and it will be effective this year. So the bottom row there is standards that are already approved, and they're just waiting on the definition approval, which I think has already occurred. But that's, if you're in Texas, then Val 1 TRE, IRO 10, Mod 32, PRC 12 and 17. PRC 12 and 17 are very likely not applicable to your plant. They have to do with remedial action schemes, which are not common among smaller inverter-based resources. But then you do have TOP3, VAR 1, and VAR 2. So those are compliance is right now it's pending FERC approval. They've been sitting on FERC's desk for a while and should be knowing about that very soon. The reason that's important is because as those standards are approved, the implementation plan is approved, and then we can give you some dates about when that will occur. But I wouldn't expect anything to be applicable that isn't already applicable for at least a year and probably multiple years. Some of these standards won't be applicable to your plant for multiple years. What can you do now? If you own a category 2 plant and you're thinking of building one, what can you do? Well, Kaylie talked about registration. What if your plant's already exists? Well, prior to registration, you can assign roles and responsibilities, make sure that you have people on your team who are ensuring compliance with those standards. You can engage with us and we'll help you with that process. You can set up effective data retention. Each of the standards has a period of time that you need to maintain data so that you can demonstrate compliance with that standard. So after your plant goes COD, you'll need to have your mod testing records, your battery testing records, your cybersecurity awareness, exercise evidence, MIDAS submittals. So MIDAS is the system that tracks what happens in a system disturbance. IRA is your inherent risk assessment, and your COP is your compliance oversight plan. Each of those has a questionnaire that's reported back to the region. And from that, they develop your model, the plan that they have to monitor your compliance with the standards. GADS reporting, unfortunately, also is applicable to all plants down to 20 MVA. So GADS is the generator availability data. They want to know what is the configuration of your plant, what are you projected to produce, and then what did you actually produce, and why there were any disturbances. So that's kind of a heavy lift, and GridSME can certainly help you get set up for GADS reporting. You're going to likely have summer and winter and summer declarations to your transmission operator, your ISO. Are you ready for that season to change? And your CSERP exercise is about how prepared you are to deal with a cybersecurity event. So those are some things that you can get in place right now, and GridSME is here to help you make sure that you're ready when it's time to register.
Perfect. And that's also just a quick overview of the many things to keep your eyes on, but it does not encompass everything. So just in summary, the GO-IBRs really introduce new dynamics to the grid due to their power electronic interface, and they are becoming more and more popular as synchronous generation is being retired, as Doug talked about. And due to this growth and really the lack of visibility, NERC and FERC are aiming to register and monitor these IBRs that meet the 20 megawatt threshold to ensure that they don't undermine system stability, visibility, or reliability. The new 20 megawatt registration requirement will ensure that the IBRs contribute to the reliability of the system, and they really are going to be capturing previously unmonitored units and promoting proactive compliance with NERC standards. The expanded oversight reflects NERC and FERC's commitment to the grid reliability, whether they're small-scale solar farms or aggregated BESS, to align with the evolving needs of our grid. And I think that is our last slide. Does anyone have any comments, questions, or concerns? Oh, it looks like we do have some. Doug, can you expand more on PRC 28 compliance dates?
Sure. So, unfortunately, we don't have a timeline and a Gantt chart from NERC about when each of these standards will be applicable to a plant, but some of the standards are applicable right now. All of those that are in that bottom group, they're already approved. The definition has been approved. So you need to be compliant with the valve standards, IRO 10, Mod 32, PRC 1217, TOP3, VAR 1, and VAR 2. Those standards are what's applicable right now. PRC 28 will also be applicable. So PRC 28 is about disturbance monitoring, and that's kind of a deeper, what we had planned today was to give you kind of an overview, and in an upcoming webinar, Lunch and Learn, we'll focus more on those standards and the details of what you need to do in order to be compliant with them. But PRC 28 can be a heavy lift. And if you're in the process of designing a plant, you should have data, you should have those data requirements for disturbance monitoring in your plans.
Perfect. And next question is, if you register as a GO-IBR this May, when would your first GADS reporting be due?
That's a really good question. I'm going to have to lean on my team. So Nick Bars is the director over managed compliance services, and he's really been leading the charge for GADS reporting for our current clients. If you shoot us an email, we can respond to that. But my thinking is that when you're registered, you're going to need to begin doing that. Nick, if you're on here and you could shoot me a Teams message, I would forward that to folks. You're welcome to send me an email, dbrown@gridsme.com, and get back with you.
Perfect. Next question is, will GRIDSME be attending any upcoming conferences? Yes. We can connect you with those teams. Matt, Sarah, I don't know if you guys are on here to talk about the specific conferences that we have coming up, but the short answer is yes, we do attend conferences, and we can get you some contact information to connect. Okay, next question. Have you heard of any indication that AESO or IESO will be following NERC's lead on Category 2 type inclusion?
So I'm not exactly sure that I understand your question, but North America is divided into compliance oversight by 6 regional entities, and you need to be compliant with the NERC standards based upon which region you're in. You may be in CAISO, you might be in MISO, you might be in ERCOT, but you're also in a NERC region, and they will be the ones that will be helping you with registration, and will be monitoring your compliance with the NERC standards. If I didn't answer your question, then please let me know, and I'll take another run at it.
I think we're talking about the Canadian groups.
I see. So that's a great question. I would expect each of the provinces to have the same approach, but that isn't really something that I've been monitoring. We have a Canadian division, and that's headed up by Jason Murray, and he's got some really wonderful resources that support him. There's Charlotte Fidel and Brenda Pernitsky. And if you direct a question to one of them or to me, I will make sure that your question gets answered.
They already work with Charlotte. That's perfect. All right. And just in case you didn't see Matt's response, GRIDSME will be at SAMNA in April, ACP in May, and RE Plus in September. But if there are any other conferences that you're attending, go ahead and let us know. We always like to know where people are going to be at and when would be a good opportunity to connect. And then we also dropped Sarah Rhodes' email in there. She is the one who coordinates our conference meetings. So that's Sarah Rhodes at gridsme.com, also in the chat. All right. And let's see, we've got about 2 minutes left here. Does anyone have any other questions? These have all been great, and I think we will anticipate hosting another GO-IBR webinar later in the year once NERC has clarified these reliability standards and the approval and the effective dates. And so we'll take time to go a little bit deeper into these standards, how they impact you and how you can prepare as well. So watch out on LinkedIn for when that is released. But right now we're just waiting on NERC to approve those so that we can take a deeper dive into each of these. Yes, we can get the slides out. We also will be posting this webinar to YouTube as well.
Thanks for joining, and reach out to us if there's something that we can help you with.
Yeah, I did drop our emails in there as well. If you have any facility specific questions or need any support in registration or RFI or developing your compliance program, go ahead and shoot us an email and we can look at what you're dealing with.
Okay.
Hey, Russ. All right. Well, we're at the top of the hour. Thank you everyone for joining. Please, again, reach out if you need anything. We're always happy to help.